Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the world that I can say this week to chat about creating and publishing on the DMs Guild and the surrounding tabletop RPG space. And this week I'm overjoyed to be joined by Alison, aka Dryad. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hello.
How are we doing today?
Good.
Sorry, sorry. No, I realized I had my phone on my desk and it started vibrating, so I just decided to throw it away. You were saying this is a smooth start.
It's all good. So yeah, I'm Alison, also known as Draz. You might know me as Drazillion on Twitter. I am a DMsGuild. Well, I guess a lot of the questions will cover what my deal is.
Yeah.
You might know me as someone who's written on the DMsGuild with Uncaged, Anthology, and Eat the Rich, and also as one of the instructors and moderators for the RPG Writer Workshop.
Yes, which I think again, as a sort of I always do this. I always accidentally date the episodes, but it's just, again the next season is the next
workshop.
The next workshop is about. I was about to call it a seasonal thing.
I guess it is because each workshop is denoted by which seasons it's in.
It could be, I don't know. It could be cool to be like, "Oh, welcome to season 7 of the RPG Writers Workshop. We now have loot boxes." No, fantastic, and you kind of answered my first question there for kind of what you've been known for, but. So you kind of got your start with, would it be correct to say you kind of got your first publication with Uncaged?
Yes. It's a really funny story with Uncaged because before then I was interested in D&D stuff and writing for it, but I was under the impression that there was only a community on Reddit with Unearthed Arcana, and I didn't know that there was actually a proper community for people who actually want to make money from this stuff, and that's not from Reddit, which is not a website I am fond of.
Yeah.
So when I just one day saw a tweet being retweeted onto my Twitter feed, and I was like, "Oh, that looks interesting. I'll figure out something to apply with." And I ended up doing that, and I actually got a response, and I was shocked because there was so many replies already that I was like, I'm sure I'll just get axed because I have never done anything like this before. But I was accepted, and I wrote an adventure at the tail end of 2018, and it was in the first Uncaged volume out in the start of 2019, and things just spiraled from there, really, just realizing that there was actually I could get money from doing this stuff, because I was absolutely certain that I was going to get 10 cents from the project, and that'd be fine because I wasn't expecting anything from it to actually see that this is a decent amount of money. This is something that I can do for not necessarily for a living, because that's extremely hard for this field, but it's not money that's not anything to sneeze at, really.
So what was it about the Uncaged call for authors that I'm curious about what was the pitch? Was what, I'm going to throw my hat into this ring. This now I want to jump in.
I'm naturally a person who loves subversive narratives, just making you double question what you've always known and think, oh wait, that's true. There's some nuance here that I wasn't really thinking about because no one's ever told me to question these things, which was definitely the thing that got me hooked initially. And then I looked through the monster manual, and then I got really angry.
Yeah, I think it was. So funny enough, so not so long ago I had Mel on, and Mel kind of shared the same story about reading the Harpy entry, and that was just I'm curious. So for not to, again, I don't want you to spoil your whole adventure. But which creature did you sort of hone in on and this needs some work?
Mine is a major spoiler for mine, but if I don't talk about what my adventure is called, maybe people won't maybe they'll still be surprised. But I use the Dryad because in the monster manual, they are specifically stated to be a female fae that got imprisoned in trees as punishments for falling in love with mortals. And I was like, okay, first of all, that is incredibly bad.
Yeah.
And secondly, that's like not how they are depicted in mythology and stuff either. So it's like, you could have just gone with them just being tree spirits.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, obviously can't really say much without spoiling.
Yeah, no,
I will say that I did make my Dryad into a Warlock patron in Uncaged Volume 4, which I think says a lot about how much I changed the Dryad in my adventure.
But I think that's kind of what, again, it's kind of the freedom you have to sort of look at the kind of existing lore that again, because I imagine with the monster manual, even though they try and kind of paint it as like agnostic to any particular setting, it is still very much inspired by the Forgotten Realms, or
definitely,
some of the other things and stuff like that, and to have that freedom to detach certain elements that are I guess the problematic and stuff like that, because I'm sure that again, I think like all the fae out there that are just running about having as many relationships as they want with mortals, being unpunished. It's everyone. I feel like it should be the case of like everyone should be punished equally. Which I feel like that's probably not that's not the message I should be going for. But it's interesting. And then you kind of, that was kind of your foot in the door, and then you kind of from there definitely. You were just like, well, I just kind of want to keep doing this. And I think so you wrote for the Uncaged Volume 1. Was it Volume 3 and Volume 4?
Volume 3 I did art for, and Volume 4 I did art and the subclass for.
Oh, fair. So a diverse set of skills then.
Yeah.
So I guess as well, so for the some of the other stuff you've been doing as well then, what's kind of the split of contributing art to a project versus contributing some of your writing?
It's definitely a case of how much time I have and whether I have a clear concept for adventure for, because sometimes I volunteer art because I like a project, but I don't have any ideas for. So me doing art is a vouching for the project basically, and believing that in its success and what it stands for. Yeah, and adventures are definitely, I like this, and I can already see where I'd go with this.
Well, that's perfect. That kind of leads into my next question then of okay, for adventures then, where do your ideas typically start? So I take it for the Uncaged example, it was using the monster manual as inspiration, but for some of the other contributions,
I tend to like to draw in fairy tales just because with monster manual stuff and stuff, there's always an angle that there's already something that's well known, but you can figure out an angle to tackle it from that would be really interesting. Yeah, because I think I was with Book of Seasons and Eat the Rich, I both drew on different folklore and fairy tales and stuff, and decided to go in weird directions with them and see where I landed up.
I mean, I guess it goes back to some of the conversations I had about sometimes it's nice to give the players an adventure that is not cliche but plays on creature comforts. It's the fact that okay, this is the story of Hansel and Gretel. Okay, these two kids have gone missing, they've been abducted, and then that kind of allows you that freedom to be okay, there's already the hook there. And then you have the freedom to play around. It's oh no, these Hansel and Gretel, they ate the witch. That's how this one goes. And is there any particular way that you do you typically go for a more sinister twist, or is it more just as much on its head as possible?
It really depends on what I what the project needs and what what tone I want, because with my adventure for Eat the Rich, which is a mouse unusual scheme, I wanted to go with more lighthearted slapstick kind of adventure in which, it's based on the Pied Piper of Hamelin, except the twist is that the bard that is the Pied Piper, she is a good guy, and she's gonna transform everyone into rats so they can infiltrate a castle and create havoc. So it's just like, let's just make it a twist that. Piper, but you are the rats.
And the kind of adventure takes place of like putting the players within the shoes of, or like transforming them into rats.
Yeah. No, and then like if they get hit prematurely and then they transform back into people, then they have to deal with other hijinks as well.
I've noticed that's actually like something that I've played around with in one of my adventures worlds, of just like turning the players into things. Or just like the sort of possibilities that open up just by like shrinking. Again, it's the guy's case of like, was it Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? Or just take an existing settings and just make the players really small. And then the typical sort of like everyday challenges become that much more amplified by being
definitely
30 times bigger. No, I'm curious then. And then, so with working on with Eat the Rich, with Book of Seasons and Uncaged, these are like big anthologies of like in some cases multiple books. How do you find like navigating or working within that sort of like project scope?
Well, my background is that I did a game design degree, so I'm definitely equipped to do group projects, and I'm very familiar with Discord, so it's really a matter of like hoping that and trusting that the higher ups will be able to communicate all the information they need from me so that I can do my part of the project.
And I guess how I guess when it comes again, so the big part I imagine for these sort of big books is kind of like consistency. Has there been kind of like some like variance in the sort of how much freedom you have, or is it quite like, here is a adventure layout that we would like you to kind of adhere to, or is it as long as it's within this word count? I'm kind of curious about like how that fluctuates.
Well, a lot of the projects that I've been in exist because of the Uncaged anthology, and therefore a lot of them draw on the same kind of principles of the Uncaged anthology. So there's definitely like a lot of my projects are definitely similar in that regard. Obviously, some might be more strict in like style guide and such, but like for the most part, like it's definitely like, hit a word count, make sure that it's reasonably structured in a way that people who are reading it will be able to comprehend it, and you'll be good.
Well, I suppose it kind of makes sense that with the success of Uncaged. And the I was about to doubt myself there, but it's run by Ashley Warren.
Yes.
It kind of makes sense. The person who now runs the RPG Writer Workshop has a pretty good method for getting people to write adventures. And that actually kind of, again, if you don't mind me asking, now as a moderator and being involved in the RPG Writer Workshop, what's that like? That's got, again, because every season it feels like that it's such an incredible buzz to see the sort of influx of like new talent or people kind of getting their foot in the door. What's it like being on the ground floor, I guess? Or just like
well, I can't really say that I'm like properly on the ground floor, because as a moderator instructor, I'm not like one of the people that are like in the like, I don't have any say over the website, and I can't like make any changes to the website or anything. So I don't like have complete control. It's more to do with the Discord itself. And in the case of like with being an instructor, it's a lot of emails back and forth. So like, that's pretty straightforward. And with the Discord, it's a lot of, reading all of the channels and making sure that everyone is being good. And for the most part, people are really good, which is surprising, because I feel like, the broad spectrum of people that would want to get into making adventures is very broad, and, not all of them would be welcome necessarily, because, there are quite some toxic, viewpoints and everything. But like, if they exist in the workshop, they haven't really like spoken up. And I think it's to do with like things, how like a lot of moderators and instructors have like pronouns in their names, and like regulars with like they them pronouns like are pretty predominant within the Discord. So I think for the most part that actually runs pretty smoothly. A lot of the stuff I do as a moderator isn't actual like moderating stuff. It's more like, oh yeah, I'm looking at the Discord anyway. I'll answer this question that I can answer because of what I know as a writer myself. And sometimes it's like stuff that I don't know myself, but I'm good at Googling, so I will find information.
Yeah.
And by conveying that information, I am, learning myself.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's a politer way than the the website "Let me Google that for you."
Yeah.
Then I guess I'm curious. So more on the instructor side, is that is that a case of like you? I suppose again, my head was in the wrong space because I'm like, do you get a set of, I was about to call them minions, which is really a bunch of trainees, or I'm failing to think of the appropriate word for people who have joined the RPG Writer Workshop that isn't somehow dehumanizing. Is it, or is it? I'm curious. Like, is it just like you have a set number of people who are kind of under your wing, or is it like an instructor in the sense of like you have a particular class saying that I'm here to help on this topic?
It's more of a Ashley asked us to write an article basically, or a lesson, and like also write up the homework for that lesson, and then like we do it, we send it back to her, we get paid, it's a good time. And then when the workshop is actually running, in the Discord there's a channel for each of the lessons, and people can drop off their lesson stuff in that channel. And in the case of most instructors, they can offer feedback and stuff. My lesson is how to get your notes and your outlines into a rough draft. So I personally don't have much to give feedback on, because you're either doing it or you're not, basically. But sometimes I offer like advice and stuff.
And
so we basically manage everyone that decides to join, but more specifically the people that actually decide to speak up, basically. So it's more manageable than if we had to supervise everyone
supervising. That is a much better term than minions. No, interesting. And then I take it, so with your lesson in particular then about taking rough notes and sort of getting into a draft, does that kind of mimic your own sort of your work process?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely that lesson arose because in the workshops before, where there was a lot of people going, okay, when do I actually start writing? How do you actually do that? And I was like, that part of the process is kind of one of my favorite ones, because I would just, get all my notes, stare at it for a good while, and then just open a new doc and then just start writing. And I'm getting the momentum from just getting all the stuff that I remember from my notes and just translating them. And it's definitely not as straightforward for other people. So it's fun to be able to put that kind of process into words in a way that would be helpful to other people.
So if I can understand it right, is it very much like you have your idea develop, you essentially make a page or two of hasty scribbles that out of context may seem for me, I know that when I'm making those hasty notes, out of context they seem like delusions. and then it's the once you sort of have that sort of blank sheet, again, I'm very much structure driven, so I immediately turn that into a skeleton of my document, and then I sort of flesh it out.
For me personally, it is more of a skeleton, more of an outline. It's definitely because again, a lot of the stuff I do is in anthologies where probably other people are going to be looking at my outline before it gets turned into an adventure. So I want it to be readable, and I want people to be able to follow this and not ask me questions that are simply not answered because I've not, written them down.
Yeah.
So they're pretty robust for notes, except I won't go into every encounter and the nitty gritty of it already, because my brain can't handle that early on. It's that's going to be handled on later in the actual adventure, but my outlines are pretty robust.
And in fact, I think that's kind of what the power of an outline is the fact that it's not a steadfast commitment. Some of the best creative work can happen as you're fleshing out an outline, because you're originally I had written I'm going to go for it. It's my fallback, 3 goblins. And it's rather than just have 3 goblins, just sat there? What can I do with that's a little bit more fun or dynamic? And on the outline, it's fine to just say there will be goblins here. But in the sort of fleshing out life, you're like, well, okay, let's put one in a hat. Let's have the other two fighting for the hat. And that's I imagine not the most unique encounter in the world, but depends how fancy the hat is. And no, interesting. And you kind of like, so you touched on this yourself. So you mentioned that the kind of outlining or just the very first one is that your favorite part of the project?
I think so. Just because I want to be able to follow my own line of logic. Because like if you are too vague, you're going to probably run into problems that you're not entirely sure how to solve if you go straight into an adventure. And obviously, if you get too detailed, I feel like you just get bogged down in those details. So there's just like a nice middle ground of things, like, because my outlines are usually like a page or 2 pages long. So it's enough that I can just have a glance over and be like, okay, where are the things I'll need to figure out before I actually like go into writing the adventure. Like if adventure like only mentions one parent, then what's the deal there? Like, is that something that's going to be important? Like this NPC only shows up for one scene. How could they be tied into the rest of the scene? Like in the adventure, like, are they going to be like a red herring? Are they going to be like pivotal to the final act? Those kinds of things.
And then I guess like, again, so to pop on your instructor hat then, and I imagine having looked at like how many rough drafts would you say that you've looked at? Like from it's okay, so I imagine it's a lot. Is there like, what are like some I don't suppose you have any tips of finding that right balance of like, not being too getting the right amount of detail essentially? Is there anything that you can?
It's really a true taste thing. It's definitely a thing that you need to figure out as you get actually writing adventures and stuff, because it's definitely a no one shoe fits all thing. Before I became an instructor, I did do a pep talk in a previous workshop where basically I was talking about this process of bridging the gap between notes and a draft, but I was talking in terms of a metaphor about art, because what I always go back to is the meme of how to draw an owl. Step 1, draw 2 circles. Step 2, draw the rest of the fucking owl. And I was thinking about that, and like how a lot of people are going to feel that way about like being told, okay, time to start writing. And I was like talking about how like I have different processes when I'm dealing with art, and sometimes because obviously sometimes people will use their outline and build off on it directly to write the adventure, and that's really good for some people, but for me, I could just not. I would I think my brain would just break, but that's still valid for other people. So yeah, it's definitely, I can't tell you what would be best for you. You have to figure it out on yourself, but I will do my best to help you figure that out. The owl metaphor is a good one, because that idea of like, you see your notes, and again, I can't even remember my notes for my first project. I think actually I was using essentially I would run a session with my party, and then I would use that sort of process of just DMing and creating stuff on the fly, and then just sort of trying to turn that into like a product. But yeah, that gap or between like the notes on page and something that is publishable in whatever shape or form that takes. I think I almost have like my process is very much iterative. So I take the notes. Let's say if we take like there's like a castle in one of the things. Let's say if I have to design a castle that the players of rats have to sneak their way in, I would probably start off by probably defining all the locations within the castle and stuff like that. And I would have like the bullet point list of essentially all the rooms.
And then I think I probably from each room I would go and throw in like a little bit of information about what you'd probably find in there or what's interesting about that room. And then from that step, I think personally what I like to do is in kind of mimicking the Wizards of the Coast like hardcover adventure book styles. Each room description only really has like 3 to 4 subheadings, depending on the average room, unless it's like, the final boss room or something complex.
Yeah.
And that's what I try and do is like, okay, well, what are my headings here? And then immediately then I'm like, okay, well, now I just need to write X or Y. Is it kind of similar for you, or is your process quite different from that?
This is like that adventure that we're talking about, like that also had a bit of more narrative at the start and like at the end. So like I was more focused on the overall narrative rather than the actual rooms, because I'm definitely someone that like isn't so suited to like dungeons and those kinds of like room crawls, but I will still have a lot of rooms in some of my projects anyway. So it's like I definitely have the floor of like, oh yeah, we'll deal with that later. So they don't even factor into my outline. I'm thinking about all the story beats and what I want from the overarching adventure. And then once I start doing the adventure proper, that's when I actually start figuring out, oh yeah, okay, I want these rooms, and then I'll like flesh them out from there as part of the adventure rather than something that I've pre-planned. Obviously, sometimes, I'm not going into them like fully unprepared. I have probably like thought of which rooms would be needed, but then there are always the rooms that are like, okay, what else? I need to fill this castle that I set myself to make. What other rooms would a castle need? And then go from there.
I mean, hands down, like one of my favorite like rooms that is you always expect in a building that I kind of love writing is the kitchen. Because there's something fun about writing like an eccentric or like exciting chef. Because like here's the thing is like even if you're in an enemy castle or like filled with enemies or whatever it is, you can have a good or like friendly chef who is just like completely unfazed by anything else in the world other than their own cooking, and it acts as like a sort of small refuge from the party. But no, I kind of 100% agree in the fact that obviously everyone's mileage may vary of how they get those notes into like an adventure format, and they're really like again, it kind of depends on what you're trying to focus on. Obviously, I get caught up in the details, and that's why it sometimes feels like I'm writing adventure, like dungeon crawl after dungeon crawl. But it's I suppose that's why sometimes it can feel like the stuff I write can almost feel like a series of locations that kind of have a thread connecting through, whereas other adventures can feel more like a coherent story that have again no right or wrong way. It's all good.
Yeah, definitely.
Well then, speaking about speaking about the opposite of good, then, is there any particular part of a project that is your least favorite?
I definitely feel like the editing part is, definitely something that I struggle with. Obviously, it's very important. Please hire an editor. They're very important. But also, I think by the time I am getting to the editing stage, my brain has already started to move on. So, having to go back and, having to revisit things definitely, isn't my favorite thing. It's, still necessary, and, I wouldn't, it's just that, the other parts of the project are much more fun to me also. So that's why it stands out. But, yeah. It's needing to revisit things and, make sure that, because obviously it's always the fun part of, and also necessary part of, realizing that some parts of your adventure don't make sense to someone else looking at it. And, oh, yeah, details that you think, would be really obvious aren't actually that obvious to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I say, it's kind of a two-part thing, because I feel like once you finish your draft and you send it off to your editor, finishing a draft almost feels like the finish line 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And realistically, it's 8/10 of the way. It's like
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's a struggle to get there, but I'm honestly like that. Sometimes when I finish a draft, I'm like, done. I never have to look at this document ever again. And then the editor's like, excuse me, hello. There's someone who you mentioned by name and then they never appear, or whatever it is. But no, I think. It is a catchphrase on this podcast to hire an editor, and but what I kind of like, I always seem to kind of emphasize, or maybe I don't emphasize enough, is the fact that yes, it is good to catch all the grammatical mistakes, of which I'm sure there are plenty, or you need someone to point out you have like that I have a unhealthy relationship with the comma, but as you kind of mentioned, that having that other set of eyes, because you inadvertently always write in your own thoughts and for the type of DM you inadvertently are, and for it's the things that you think are very self-explanatory. They just need the other set of eyes. I'm curious, is there any particular edits that you've gotten in the past minute that kind of stand out? Just because I think there's one or two where I think I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. Chances are I think it was when I had Sadie edit one of my projects, where it was just the politeness of some of the comments going, is this did you mean this? It's just because this is very this could be very different and
none that I can really think of, honestly. But like, I feel like a lot of the time I'm like, I trust what my editors are saying, so I'm like, that makes sense, I'll change it. I don't really think too much of them after I've made the edit.
No, it's kind of fair, just because I was about to say sometimes those things do get lost in the sea of red. Which I think it depends on your editor and stuff like that. But no, it's yeah, and so aside, I think it's aside from editing, is there's it's I guess it's kind of curious because like with large anthologies in particular, I imagine that there is sometimes like a lot of gaps of time between you hand off your final finished edited product to the kind of like the end release. I always like with my personal projects, I kind of like that freedom to be like, I'm done with it. I could release it right now. I'm very impulsive. And it's interesting in the collaboration that I've done where it's just like, oh yeah, I don't know if you have the habit of kind of forgetting that you actually contribute to something, because
definitely like there'll be like months go past and I'm like, oh yeah, that's coming out. I remember that.
That's the thing I did. I remember spending a month of my time, and now it all sort of comes flooding back.
Yeah.
Do you like that sort of like time structure to sort of have that you submit your commitment to the sort of like anthology, and then you're just like, well, I guess I'm free now. It'll be out when it's out.
Yeah, I do like that, especially like in like times where I am like working on like different anthologies at the same time. So I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that's I don't think about that. I can like move on to this other project, and like I don't really have the time to really like mull on it until the project comes out. Like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happened.
No, and then so I guess what was it? So across the so you've done for Uncaged, you've done Book of Seasons. You did, I think, you also participated in Eat the Rich, Unbridled as well.
Yeah, Unbridled, Unbreakable.
Is this consulting the catalogue of?
To check my Dropbox to see what it fits.
Was it Friends, Friends, Foes, and Other Fine Folks?
Yeah, definitely. Though that one's more of an NPC book than like adventures.
Yeah.
I also did art for 12 Days of Midwinter. My thing right now is that like a lot of my projects currently aren't anthologies, so
no, like I said, I imagine are not quite out yet.
Yeah, exactly. I have a lot of like. We'll touch on this later, I'm sure, but like a lot of my projects right now, they are things that aren't on the DMs Guild and they are under NDA, so I can't really talk about them. So when I think about what projects I've done, I'm just like, what have I done that I can talk about?
Okay. I think that's a sign of your success. I feel like to hit the point of NDAs is a point of like, wow, this is
definitely.
This is really cool. The problem I have is the moment you hear the word NDA, it's always like, I need to be professional. I can't ask. I know it's, again, especially on a podcast, you can't ask.
Yeah.
But there's always that thing of like, it's the temptation of not knowing what you don't like.
Yeah.
But no, it's really exciting. I take it you've kind of like the success of some of these anthologies and collaborations in particular. Do you think they've kind of set you up very well for
Yeah, definitely. Like, I definitely think like it's writing portfolios is such an interesting thing to me, because I feel like with art, it's like, oh yeah, you actually want to look at them and then you can like see at a glance like what someone's capable of. But with writing, it means that someone actually like sat down and read my stuff, which is wild to me, and thought, oh yeah, this is good design, this isn't incomprehensible. And so yeah, like I guess people have like looked at my writing enough to be like, oh yeah, I can recommend her, or like I think should be a good fit on this project. And it's like,
but I must admit,
happens.
I don't envy the job of people who have to like assess adventure, because I mean, obviously there is like ways of knowing a what sets apart a good adventure from like a mind-blowing best adventure in the world sort of thing. But I imagine like so much of it is like it's hard to, because you're right, you're reading the words that are in their ideal setting would be in front of a table of players, and you don't necessarily get that engagement from just reading it. And here's the thing, I enjoy like reading adventures. As an adventure writer, you kind of like, it's a good way to kind of learn about what's kind of been done before and pick up like interesting tidbits and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's they're weird, aren't they? It's not a novel. It is kind of a game, but it's that weird mystery.
Yeah, it's more of an instruction manual.
Yeah, just with more audience participation.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, fair. And then I guess so. I guess like if you don't mind me asking, then kind of like across like all the collaborations you've done, is there a particular adventure or submission that you're particularly proud of?
I think my adventure for Book of Seasons, which is called Until the Before the Pitchforks Come, is still my favorite adventure, even if like my adventure for Uncaged is way more well known than that, because basically it's a take on the Snow Queen fairy tale, in that like two children have gone missing up a snowy mountain, and you have to like try and figure out like where they went and like rescue them before they die of hypothermia or something, and going up the mountain and then realizing like the big plot twists of who the Snow Queen is, and the other thing about it is that the town that the kids ran away from is deeply like misogynistic and xenophobic, and it's just like I feel like it's definitely a very me adventure, because it's it was like, and obviously with Uncaged I was really establishing who I was, but by the time I wrote Before the Pitchforks Come, I was really getting into the swing of things, of just like dealing with themes like misogyny, and then like wrapping them with fairy tales, and then like talking about subversions and stuff. I think it's definitely an adventure that I had a lot of fun with.
Mm-hmm. So basically it's kind of that kind of that satisfying point of like finding your brand, or like the sort of the themes, and it sounds like, because what was it? Didn't was that Book of Seasons, like was it the I forget the name. It's not called Winter, is it?
Solstices.
Solstices. There's no way I could remember that word off the top of my head. It sounds like again with your adventure in particular, you kind of preempted Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Yeah, definitely.
You were ahead of the curve.
But like, nearly, I guess, because it was like released in December. Yeah.
So I guess like again, my next kind of question is then, so with dealing with like, I guess, like themes like to use your example, like misogyny and stuff like that, I'm curious about like, how do you, I guess in like Maneuver, is like, how do you incorporate those sort of themes while, I guess, in the best way being not, I don't want to, again, not respectful of misogynists, but you kind of get what I mean. Is obviously in an ideal situation, stuff like that, obviously all tables kind of have the appropriate safety tools and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But having those themes within the adventure themselves, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or opinions around that.
Well, for before the pitchforks come, I specifically set it in a town that, so basically you could put it anywhere and it would still make sense for that town to be misogynistic because they're so insular and because they're in the mountains. They don't really communicate with, other civilizations. So it's, you don't really need to figure out how to justify it too much. Yeah, and I definitely do, with my adventures, set it in a specific location, even if it's like, a setting neutral one. Mm-hmm. So you can really like figure out, okay, this is how this place works. I don't have to think about how the rest of the world thinks.
Yeah. Okay, fair. So you kind of make it like, it's insular, as you kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? Fair. Okay, no, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And obviously, particularly for anthologies, I think, again, it's kind of having that ability to be able to just sort of drag and drop it that within your own campaign is kind of very sort of appealing.
And with that, like, obviously I have themes that I stay far away from, even if, I do want to talk about deeper and darker themes. Like, none of my adventures will feature homophobia, even if it would make sense for like a villain to be homophobic. It just doesn't show up. So it's really like, if a DM feels like that's a thing they want to bring up, then, that's hopefully something they've figured out is on the table for their players, and that they can handle in a way that is respectful of their players. That's not part of my adventure anymore.
I think it's a difficult balance of that, especially when you want to write like particularly emotive or challenging adventures, is balancing that line of like, okay, well, this is appropriate for the adventure, or this is now again erring on the part where it could be more harmful than it is the message and stuff like that. I mean, again, it's classic ways of like, there are many ways to make a villain appear a villain, and there's the sort of thing of like, he doesn't have to like kick a puppy. If he just takes a cat and puts it in a tree, then that's probably good enough. Like, no animal cruelty needs to happen. Just small things like that. And particularly of like, again, a lot of people use D&D as like a escapism. And it's kind of trying to particularly balance that. But no. Again, I thank you for the response. And then, I guess to kind of like summarize then, to talk about your creative experience as a whole, then to bring it all full circle in. Is there any lessons that you kind of wish you'd learned earlier in the process?
This one's definitely like that I should have thought more about, but I feel like my background has definitely like prepared me for a lot of the process. There's nothing that really stands out about things I could have learned earlier, especially like I'm definitely very lucky that like with Uncaged, it was a very big project, a lot of people interested in it and like were willing to like, proofread and, look over things. So like, all things considered, I had it very lucky.
So to give you, I guess, I was supposed to give you more time to maybe think about it, but then I'm also going to ask you a different question, which I don't think. Here, think about this while you answer this one. What was you mentioned that so you come from like a game development, what was the name of your course? Because I'm also a game dev student. I come from like a computer games technology.
Yeah, my degree was just called like Bachelor of Design (Games).
Oh, nice.
Very straightforward one.
Was it the case of like it was like a design course that had multiple branches that kind of ventured on, or
no,
really?
It's a very interesting one that because I live in Melbourne, Australia. I realized I never mentioned that because I assumed that was going to be brought up sometime.
Sorry, that's my dad as a host.
Yeah, I live in Melbourne in Australia, which has a very predominant indie game scene. Like it's the city that brought Untitled Goose Game out into the world, and like Necrobarista like quite recently, and those kinds of things. So it's like there is like enough of a games presence here where like a course dedicated to it is just a thing that exists. And my university wasn't the only university to offer that either, which is kind of wild to think about. Yeah. So yeah, there's this whole ecosystem here already where people can learn how to make games.
It's curious though. Then obviously, if it's like it's like still the naming conventions of like design, and then just like games. Yeah. But no, I get it's kind of similar in the UK, where obviously fortunate enough that I think in the UK in particular. I don't know if this is interesting, everyone, but one of the largest exports in the entertainment industry is the UK games industry. So it kind of makes sense why universities are trying to, get people in and out of university and all that. But no, it's interesting. Yeah, I love it. I feel fortunate enough to be able to occasionally use the stuff that I picked up in, obviously digital game development. They aren't like, it's not one-to-one. Again, and obviously all my sort of lessons in programming don't necessarily apply to a D&D adventure. Other than these sort of abstract, like, okay, well, writing in a clear, concise manner, which I think is
a bunch of if statements.
The one adventure I'm just going to write it as like a script file.
Just confuse everyone.
Of like a series of like I'll put in like a for loop of just like and for as as long as this person's still alive.
God,
it's what I think that would be a curious challenge to try and write a adventure as if it was a programming like a program of sorts. I don't
know what that would even look like.
I don't think it will be good. It's something I need to emphasize. But no, and I guess to pivot an earlier question then, is there anything that if you were to go back to the Draz just as they're about to start writing for Uncaged Volume 1, is there any wisdom you might share?
There are definitely things that like I feel because my adventure for like is definitely my shortest one because Uncaged had a word count limit of 3,000, and a lot of my projects since have either had a word count of 3,500 or 4,000. So there was definitely I was definitely scoping it down really small because in my brain I was like, I've never, written one of these, I need to make sure I don't accidentally balloon this out of proportion. I guess now I've definitely learned how to how much 3,000 words can fit on if I were able to bump it up to 3,500, what would I add? And what, would I still not add unless I had a higher word count? But that's also a lot of things that kind of have to learn while doing these things. So I'm not sure if I wanted to learn that earlier, I don't think I could have.
I must admit, I think writing an adventure to word limit is a very interesting challenge. Because especially if you're in writing my own adventures and stuff like that, I don't give myself a word limit, and that can sometimes be a problem because you let your words kind of get away from you, and next thing you're drowning in them. But yeah, no, again, it's a skill, and especially if you're looking at being on projects where you sign NDAs, being able to write to a word count is a valuable skill. Wow. No, awesome. I guess to kind of round it off then, to talk about the community, the wider community as a whole, and the future. You've had you've managed to work with, I imagine, like a countless number of amazing people within the community. Is there anyone that you kind of want to or anyone who particularly inspires you, or you kind of want to shout out?
I mean, I feel like mine was very obvious to anyone who's been listening to this whole podcast so far, and that would be Ashley Warren, because I do feel like if I say that I owe everything to her, she will, tell me that that's not true. But I feel like without Uncaged and without her constant support and letting me moderate for her Discord and being like, yeah, you can write for my workshop, all those, and obviously the fact that she fostered so many people to then start making projects. I mean, that's the reason why there are projects called Unbreakable and Unbridled out there, because that's a direct sign of a nod towards the Uncaged project, and just her influence is so widespread that you don't really think that something is influence until you realize, oh wait, yeah, I can see, that this all leads back to Ashley.
I mean, again, again touching on earlier with the sort of the seasonal influx of new. It's, I mean, with all the work Ashley has been doing and stuff like that. I mean, they're almost I was going to say the ruler, or the sort of quote unquote paternal figure of countless people of who under their guidance and the structure that they've kind of put in place too.
Yeah, not to date this episode, but it was her birthday quite recently, and I did homebrew her into an actual Warlock patron, so you can find out on my Twitter.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's probably the most apt description as a patron of maybe not of necessarily otherworldly powers, but I mean still powers all the same. There's
very worldly powers.
You know what? Yeah.
Instead of otherworldly patrons, now get ready for worldly patrons.
It's a lot more wholesome. Yeah. I can only mimic and agree with. I hate the fact that every time someone says, "Oh, this person inspires me," I always say I agree with that, because there's never a case where I'm going to disagree.
Unless it's someone you've never heard of, and you're like, who?
No, never heard of them. They cannot be inspirational to you, because this one person has not heard of them. Therefore. No. Yes, I agree. Yes. So I guess looking out to the future, then I'm gonna kind of do I'm. It's gonna be weird, but I'm gonna pivot, almost merge three questions into one here, which it's gonna be very skillful. But can you talk? So what are you currently working on? And obviously, if everything is under NDA at the moment, what are some of the things you want to work on in the future? We're getting the if statement in. and with all that information, where's kind of the best place for people to hear about all your work and whatnot?
All right, so all of my projects, well, most of them are on an NDA, but I can say for one of them is that I'm working with MCDM on the Arcadia Project, which is a bunch of people are being contracted by MCDM to write articles that will be going out to their patrons. So and I'm writing an adventure for that, because that everyone else is writing advice and stuff. I'm I'm gonna use this word count to write what I know best. I'm also, I've ceased actual working on it for quite a few months already, but I have contributed to D4BLM, which is a charity zine that will be going out on DMsGuild soon. TM. The best way to keep track of that is to follow them at D4BLM on Twitter for updates. But all proceeds are going to charity for for I think NAACP. I probably got that wrong, but yeah, for legal fees and that kind of stuff. And I suppose that's all I can really talk about for now.
Yeah, again, I don't want to push you and cause an accidental NDA break.
Yeah.
But no, we'll make sure that the DBLM Twitter handle is somewhere within the description as well for people to sort of follow and stay up to date with all that information. Wow, no, incredible and stuff like that. And being involved in the Arcadia project, that's got it's because it's being edited, or like the lead editor is not lead editor.
The person in charge is James.
Yeah, James.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what. Again, I think I've proven to you over the course of an hour the fact that if people have a title, I don't know what to call that title. If they are workshop appliquees, I'm going to call them minions. If they are the leaders of a magazine, I will call them lead editors. I'll be honest. At this point, it's a talent that I. But no, I'm curious. And is that so? It was. I imagine that was something that you were kind of approached about.
Yeah, that was definitely really interesting. That like I am at the stage in my life where I can just open my emails one day and be like, "Hey, do you want to work on this?" And I'd be like, "Of course I do." But like, me?
Who gave you this email?
Yeah. Who referred you? Where did you come from?
And then I imagine that leads to a plethora of exciting NDA projects.
Yeah, definitely. And like I can't wait for some of my NDA projects to like be released into the world so I can actually talk about them.
I think if it's I imagine it's very similar to like I've the amount of tweets I've seen of like people tweeting, "Oh hey, I worked on this thing. Turns out it's now public knowledge."
Wait.
I don't. Like I said, I imagine obviously the process is very much like after you submit your application, then it goes away and stuff like that. But I would have thought they might have been in the loop of like saying, "Oh, there's going to be the public announcement this day," and it's like they always see like I don't know the freelancers and the tabletop public, they always seem surprised by announcements of projects that they're involved in. It's like I didn't even know this was a thing that I did.
Yeah, really.
Sorry, that's some observational comedy. Well, as I say, Draz and Alison, thank you so much for taking the time. As I say, final thing before we kind of go and stuff like that is if people do want to stay up to date with everything you're doing, would you like to plug some of your social media handles? And
I am Drazillion on Twitter, and that's basically where I am most of the time, unless you're on Discord, which the only way to access me on Discord is to be in a Discord with me, so...
Yeah, good luck.
So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Drazillion, and there are all of my links and stuff for other things there, but like, that's basically where you can find me the most. If you want to look at my Itch.io stuff, I'm Drazillion on Itch.io as well. And I guess if you want to look at my DMsGuild stuff, just write in Alison Huang in the search bar and you'll find me there as well. But
at the very least, always what I do is in the description I always have like a link to people's DMsGuild profiles, just because it's the Dungeon Masters Guild house. But no, we can throw in a link to your website to get let people find all your amazing games, because again, it's that case of like funny enough, there's plenty of other games out there that you should go and give a go.
Yeah, but I am easily findable.
It's good. It's good. I suffered from the case of like when I first started on the internet, not finding my brand, and it's a case of like, do I want to be known as I think was Matt was my thing that I kind of went with, and I was like, I went through a phase of like, no, it's Mr. Matt Chow now. But I'm glad that I've Whitby writes. That's that's what I'm going with, and that's kind of what I'm going to stick with. But yeah, no, again, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been an absolute blast.
No problems.
Yeah. I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I've got my branding down. Be sure to sort of tune in next week. Because I'm quickly approaching episode 52, and I can't believe I've been doing this for a year.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to get a cake or something. But before worrying about cakes or anything like that, my very final question then is, how do we end a podcast?